eliminating as much as we can with that. And because of the current, the exact moment in history that we're living in, it's like so possible and insanely quick.
All right, what's up? Welcome to Selfmade. Here we have the boys from Legion Health today, Arthur, MacWaters, and Danny. What's your last name, Danny?
Wilson. Usually go by Daniel G. Wilson because there's like
Daniel G. Wilson.
4 other Daniel Wilsons hogging the top.
So, it's a strong name.
So you're the G, Daniel the gangster.
G. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Well, thanks for jumping on today, guys.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
So what are you guys working on a little bit at the moment? Give us a bit of kind of a background of how you got to where you are and what you're doing currently.
Yeah, I'll start with what we're doing currently, and then I think Danny has a great roll-up of how we got here. So we're building a digital health company in the mental health and psychiatry space. And the problem that we're solving is essentially that people have very limited access to high-quality mental health care, and specifically psychiatry. So in mental health, there's a kind of a fuzzy line that divides talk therapy and other modalities, which include medication. And we're on the side that includes medication and a little bit of talk therapy, but that's one of the areas where the country has the fewest active providers, and yet a growing number of patients who need that help. And it gets even worse if you try to find a provider in that space that takes your insurance. And so what we've essentially been building is a psychiatric network, but that's just the sandbox really for taking great care of patients, and also building some pretty fun technology that we think will also generalize to many other parts of medicine. There aren't very many areas of medicine where there isn't a supply shortage of providers, and where the issues that patients face are just so complex and frustrating and leads to like an annoying and difficult patient experience. And so if we're able to solve it here in the mental health space and continue growing at the pace that we currently are, we think that there's going to be some big impact, not only in the sphere that we're currently in and reaching people in psychiatry, but maybe some other things eventually in the future. Anything to add to that as far as like what we're currently doing and then the history?
I'd say that's a really good roll-up. I think the only thing I would tag on is that something that we noticed very early in the lifetime of the company is that while there's for sure a massive shortage in the number of mental health professionals, we still believe that there's actually, at the very least, a much larger amount, but potentially enough time. Like 50% of mental health professionals' time is eaten up by dealing with insurance companies, booking patients into their calendar, fielding calls from prospective patients who aren't actually patients that they see yet. And to add to that, when you are talking about a larger practice or a larger organization, one like we've actually already scaled to now, where we have a front office staff, there's a lot of conversations and pieces of the whole mental health care experience that don't happen between the patient and the provider. They happen outside of it, dealing with issues with the pharmacy and not being able to pick up your prescription, telling the front office staff, hey, I thought I was supposed to be taking this amount of medication, wasn't I? Which that full set of extra conversations would never actually make it to the provider. And even if they did, the provider wouldn't have enough time to deal with it. So some of the most exciting stuff that we've been building is kind of around those areas. It's what happens across the full spectrum of a patient's mental health care. And then how do we both help make clinicians more efficient so that they can spend way more time with the patients, and from that full spectrum, have the context and data from every interaction or experience the patient is going through, not just the 30 minutes or an hour that they're in the visit.
So this is like a software platform you guys have, and the end users are the practitioners?
Yeah, and in a way, one of the things that Arthur said that I think we think about a lot is this idea of a sandbox. It's a software platform that is at the moment just for us. And it's something that is a fundamental need that allows us to, for example, be seeing hundreds of patients with only a front office staff of 2 at the moment. And also to make sure that clinicians who in other organizations often feel like slammed back to back with patients with barely enough time to review and dig through the patient's medical history to know what to ask, what to prescribe. We don't in any future state intend to do that whole unfortunately sort of accepted trend of like squishing appointments closer and closer together. But for our clinicians, we are able to help them extract the things that they might want to know or need to know from a patient's potentially 10 years medical history and find the things that could be really important, find the things that they've said to the front desk that could be important. It's all stuff that is a kind of bespoke software platform that we're building because we, our employees, and our clinicians need it. But it's also something that's because of that sandbox, if you will, could be something that we expand in the future to other mental health organizations, other healthcare organizations.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Danny's saying, our customers are the patients, but
Yes.
we're not trying to acquire a massive number of patients and make them pay us on a monthly basis. We're trying to get the people who need help to their first visit within 24 hours and then bill their insurance company. Probably 80 to 90% of the revenue comes from the insurance companies with benefits the patients have already paid for. So it's really just a matter of getting the patients the care they need and making it affordable for them. And all the workflow with working with the insurance companies is part of why mental health has been difficult in the past for most folks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
especially with all the hurdles it takes to actually get paid for them. From them.
So essentially, you guys are making a far better experience for everybody. Is that correct? Much quicker.
Yeah, the healthcare space is incredibly complex because of the regulations and it's like a bunch of different little tribes and systems, and they don't talk to each other very well at all. And in a space like mental health, that means that if you're a patient, you're trying to get care, even if you're willing to pay $500 an hour, it might take you 2, 3 months to get in with a quality psychiatrist because that patient or that person's already super booked. And if you want to have it paid for by your insurance, then or especially if you have something like Medicare or Medicaid, which is an area that we'll probably go into before too long, then your wait time could be like 6 months plus. It's like at that point, your condition may have worsened. All of the impacts of that are taking their toll. So if we're able to verticalize, which is what we do right now, right? We have the insurance contracts, we hire the providers, we're building out more and more of our own software to handle the patients. We're bundling it all into like an environment that the patient can get what they need as quickly as possible, and we're abstracting away all of the, sorry to curse, but bullshit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a lot of friction.
Exactly. And then you asked about the founding journey or like the how we got here. So
Yeah,
we didn't know that we were
exactly.
going to start a company together. We met in sophomore year of college. We were lucky enough to go to Princeton together same year, and became friends. We were roommates in our senior year. Didn't have any idea that we were going to try to build a company together, anything like that. Danny, after graduating, went to Microsoft and was on the platforms team, right? Mainly
Office platform team, yeah, lots of Excel, lots of, funnily enough, Microsoft's Zapier competitor called PowerRocket.
So like dealing with automations that affect hundreds of thousands of people at the very low end, like anything that you do affects like 100,000 users. Um, our third co-founder Yash was probably the most excited about healthcare and was like one of the healthcare nerds at Princeton. So just a legend. He's been incredibly consistent in his interests. He went and worked at the Congressional Budget Office doing healthcare policy. Congressional Budget Office is like a nonpartisan body. They just work on things like estimating the impact of bills and the cost of them. So he's working on all of the Medicare policy work, especially around prescription drug pricing. And then I went and worked at McKinsey. So I was doing management consulting, getting to work on the go-to-market and growth strategies for big tech companies. And about 2.5 years into this, we're like, gosh, like it'd be really cool to be able to build things with each other. Like there's kind of this window of opportunity. We don't have kids, we don't have wives, we don't have mortgages. We have this hunger to build something and to have more control over our own destiny. Like let's quit our jobs and build something together. So we did, and we were lucky enough to get into Y Combinator as well, mainly on Danny's prompting. So that application was probably one of the most stressful things we did initially, but like getting that like call from Michael Seibel saying, "Hey, like we'd like you guys to join Y Combinator," like we freaked out. I was actually Jaron was my roommate at the time. We were like running around the house like so stoked. So that
For
was
those
part one of the.
for those that might not know what Combinator is, why don't you give us a little bit of a overview of that and some of the companies that have come out of that?
Sure. I mean, this is definitely something that anybody listening should go check out, look up. It's like pretty wild to see the history or the impact that's had in depth. I think we're coming up on or just passing Y Combinator's 14th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
But it was started by Paul Graham and his wife, whose name I always forget, so I feel bad. Sorry if they're ever listening to this.
It's definitely not Lindsey Graham. Different Graham. Yeah.
But they basically started originally out of Boston and then eventually San Francisco, and it was the first startup accelerator. And Paul Graham had this thesis that, hey, a lot of the earliest problems that startups deal with tend to actually look extremely similar. And as a result of that, if you were to bundle up a bunch of founders and a bunch of the earliest of early startups and then help them work through problems at the same time, you could actually have massive impact on the world because you would help them produce a lot of companies that would get stuck on these silly shared things, not even directly relevant to the unique thing they're trying to do. You would help a lot of these companies exist that otherwise would not have. And
you can help founders way earlier than if you just go through the typical, like, your first interaction with investors is at Series A, and you need to have like a fully built out, customer pipeline. They're like, we'll take people earlier.
And Michael Seibel, who we mentioned, was until recently he was like head of YC early stage, and he was one of the co-founders of Twitch.tv, which was one of the earlier YC companies. Other notable names include Airbnb, DoorDash, Coinbase. There's a lot of larger like B2B ones, Instacart,
Reddit, surprisingly.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of just like absolutely incredible world-changing companies that have, I would argue they would agree in large part and gotten to where they are because of that early experience. So super like thankful and still kind of mind blown to this day that we got to go through the same thing.
Do you guys finish the program, or how's that work?
Yeah, it's a 3-month-long program held during the summer and the winter. They're considered batches, if you will. Contains like a bunch of general like walk through lecture style things about common problems, syncs with like a smaller cohort of fellow companies that they pair you with, office hours with an individual partner. Some of them are more technical, some of them are like subject matter experts, so you kind of take your pick there. And then some of the most exciting ones were these weekly calls with like major YC founders. Like we got to hear from Brian Chesky is one of the earliest calls, the CEO of Airbnb, and his story about, not going into the details, but like a very candid story about what they were dealing with as a company during COVID.
Or like the Collinson brothers from Stripe. Like you just get to hear some great, like really inspiring things, and then you end the call and you're like, shit, like what are we doing? We need to go like work on our stuff.
Oh, actually, wait, I'm completely forgetting the obvious way to like really hammer in examples. So notable figure of late who was very involved with Y Combinator / was the president for a little while, I think. Sam. And then Daniel Kahn, the founder of Cruise, was also a speaker at the most recent Alumni Day. I'm blanking on one other really crazy one.
Oh, Tim Ellis, Relativity Space, the 3D printed rockets guy.
Yes.
So cool.
Yeah. So you want to talk about a track record? They pretty much got all of it.
Yeah. And if you want to talk about imposter syndrome, like, whew, that was like pretty wild.
So you guys completed that program, and then you moved to Austin?
Yep. We actually, since it was during like kind of COVID-ish, like it was all virtual. So we actually lived in Austin while we were going through it.
Very cool. Is it still mostly virtual now, or do they?
No, they went back to in person, and they have these like annual reunions. So we go back every September to San Francisco, and that's when we got to see Sam Altman speak, and all these other crazy people. You're just like, wow, like my mind's blown.
Yeah, no, that's so cool to be around, in a room of guys like that.
Yeah, it's been awesome for sure.
Yeah, so I wanted to hear a little bit, because Jerem's telling me you guys are doing some pretty crazy stuff on the automation side. And you were talking about a kind of like Zapier competitor you have, and I'd love to dive into a little bit of that to see, maybe some of the stuff you guys are doing and dive into how it's changing, how you do business.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah. Where do you want to start? What was the thing that kind of jumped out, I guess, maybe a question for Jared as most interesting? Try to build context from there.
Sure. Well, Danny, I know your background and you've had a lot of experience with the coding and the tech side, and it's more recent for Artie. He's kind of been jumping into it a little bit more recently, and he was in San Diego a couple of weeks back and kind of showed me some of the I guess the integration that you've been doing, where you can automate a lot of things, like basically anything that somebody does on a repeat basis, there's at least a certain amount of automation that you can do to cover that, which kind of got my mind going for some of these service businesses that we're actually buying. What can we automate to increase the customer experience? What can we automate to remove user error? What can we automate to just tie up the whole process completely? I know Ali's been doing a lot of that. So I don't know if you just want to speak in a little bit of kind of the automation you guys have been doing, what it can do, and then some of the applications you think it would work for.
Cool. So maybe I can frame the high level thing and then hand it off to you, Arthur, just sort of talk about some of the detailed stuff that we're doing. So one of the things that I want to kind of highlight that Arthur mentioned earlier is healthcare is really complicated and inefficient in large part because of how many individual parties need to talk to each other. And very often that literally means talk to each other. When it's not talking to each other, they do get more efficient. For example, they send faxes. It's pretty prehistoric here in terms of technology and healthcare. And thankfully that is changing in large part across many different verticals, but especially in mental health, that still remains the case. We actually to this day get a large number of patients referred in that come in via fax. So that was one sort of problem floating around top of mind for us for a very long time. And there's also a set of problems of, okay, the people who need to talk to each other include the insurance companies and the pharmacies and the providers and the front office and then the patient themselves. And they all need to coordinate on things like scheduling and all of these other, honestly, rather abstract things. Like a lot of the rest of the world's industries have been able to figure out, okay, you want to book a haircut? Here you go, use this nice calendar thing. Somehow that's only just starting to make its way into mental health and the rest of healthcare. But when you take that scheduling problem of okay, right now what I have to do is I have to call up this mental health practice or practitioner on the phone, coordinate with them to look at their calendar and then tell them what my preferences are. And you multiply that by the number of different places things are handled via conversation or written form or text form. There's a lot of really, really scattered, simple in their own right problems to be solved. But because there's so many, solving for one of them is not really enough to make a dent. So this is something we've been chewing on for a long time. And every company who's kind of addressed these problems piecemeal has done pretty well because healthcare really needs it. But they haven't been able to make a significant impact in the overarching patient care experience, say in a specialty like mental health. Because if you solve the annoyance of scheduling, well, you've just left so much else on the table that's probably is now eating the time that you freed up there. So this high level framing is all the work my way towards. We needed something that would be a chassis, if you will, to help us solve for all of these different types of problems rather than just going one by one. We needed to be low enough cost, either time-wise or number of engineers you have to hire-wise, in order to be able to solve some of the things that, again, one by one are sort of insignificant in their effect. And we also needed to be able to take advantage of the thing that's, again, highlighting the point about number of people talking to each other, has changed in the past year in the world. It's the fact that we can now take unstructured data, language data, and actually do something meaningfully with it, do what really is intended. This is obviously, as most people listening to this will probably know, a really, really big deal. But I think what's less commonly known is that arguable opinion, but I think there is a place for therapy chatbots, for example, or chatbots in general. I do not believe that to be the highest ROI use of language models. What some people probably know is that language models are based on a 2017 development from Google DeepMind called a transformer model. And the craziest part about this thing is it's able to take, language A and transfer it into language B, or complete the text from language A into A plus B. But it's also an arbitrary transformer of data. and I'll end my kind of long lead in here in a sec, but it's able to take any type of unstructured data, most common of which is language, and then turn it to any other type of unstructured or structured data. So what that means is if we have a platform that can solve for many different types of problems in a cost-effective, time-efficient way, that also plays very nicely with language models. That means that we can solve for the massive array of problems that are occurring as a result of people literally talking to each other, because we can process what's being literally said, do something, do the right thing with it, and do that for many different problems in a very quick manner. And like as you're kind of diving into it now, Arthur, handing it off to you, one of the craziest things is how fast we've been able to solve for many of these, like in the past, very difficult problems that entire companies have spun up to solve. We've just been able to solve it in a matter of days. So,
Yeah, that's good.
hopefully that makes sense. That was a pretty long monologue, but
no, yeah, definitely following. So, like, how do you like collect that data? I guess maybe Arthur, you could give us some of the details. Like, how do you collect it and then take that unstructured data and have a structured result?
Let me walk through like what it would look like if we just had, infinite zero cost, like very intelligent people that could help us help patients. So one of the most common things is that, for a patient to find the right medication regimen, the right, therapeutic approach, the connection with their provider, it typically takes somewhere like 5 to 9 visits for them to really be like in a stable place, especially if they're coming in with a more severe, disorder or problem. But that doesn't happen if you don't come back for those 5 to 9 visits. And a lot of times what will happen is a patient will come in for their first appointment and they'll be like, okay, the provider wants to see you again in 4 weeks. And something happens where they don't get booked. And so the first, solution that most companies take is they say, all right, well, just, talk to the front desk on the way out, or have the provider look at their calendar in the future and book your next appointment while you're there. And obviously we did that too to begin with. We're like, hey, let's just call every patient and get them booked on the calendar. But that only works.
You guys have like a clinic that you're running like beta tests in, or?
So it's not like beta testing. It's like literally we're growing a direct psychiatry company. So we don't have like a physical location, but like we still have a front desk. We still have a stellar team of like healthcare veterans that like actually have run these types of operations.
So it's both. You have the one that you're growing, but then are you also kind of parsing out these solutions as a standalone product, or
it's not a standalone product. It's like everything is in service of our current company, but the idea is that some of these things generalize because every healthcare company runs into similar problems. So what I was saying is like, patients on their way out, like, hey, when do I see this person again? If there's literally a front desk they can walk by, great. Somebody will probably catch them and do it. But that only works at a small scale. What do you do if you're starting to see like 20, 30% of your patients not coming back for that scheduled follow-up? That's tough. I mean, if you have infinite time and infinite people, just call everybody until they answer and do these other things. But that's one of the key pieces that has made mental health hard is the margins on each insurance code that you build don't account for like a crazy number of admin staff to patients ratio. So that's where the automation comes in. So we have data about when the patient should be seen next, right? It's either 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months, something like that. We can have the provider indicate, hey, we want to see this patient again in 4 weeks. And they would actually prefer to be seen generally in the afternoons. So we take that data and then we go and get all of the available upcoming appointments with that provider in a certain time window. And sometimes that's like 130 different appointments. Even that is better than asking, our already swamped clinic admins to go and look at all the available slots for each patient and like try to choose. But if we were able to do that, they would be like, well, most patients prefer to be seen at the same day of week and time of day as their last appointment. So like, I'll try to optimize for that. And then if they indicated, okay, I work in the morning, so I can't do mornings, I have to do afternoon. Like they'll use a very intuitive human like approach to finding the best available appointment.
And maybe they'll even know the patients and know extra details about what their ideal would be.
Exactly. So we're getting some data from like just basic things in the EMR. Patient was last seen at, March 13th at 1:38 p.m. Okay, cool. Then there's things that are unstructured, like preferences or, notes from the care team. And then there's, again, structured data about all possible available upcoming slots. We could write a really complex algorithm to be like, okay, let's do like a radial search from the ideal time, which is same day, week, same time of day, and like stack rank all the remaining slots and then just select one and text the patient. Or, and this is the cool part, we can like do a very specific prompting for an LLM, right? To say, hey, look, we're passing you all the available slots, plus the information about the patient's past visits, plus the notes about their preferences. You choose the best available slot and give your reasoning. And then we go and book that slot. And then we text the patient with the reasoning for why we booked that slot and say, hey, just want to let you know, like, based on the notes from your last encounter with your provider, it sounds like you should be seen again in this approximate time period. We've gone ahead and booked that slot for you just so that the provider doesn't get too booked up, and we're able to get you back in the right time frame. But if you want to reschedule it, here's the link to reschedule. And so it's not like we're trying to like tighten every bolt down to create maximum efficiency. It's like, no, we're just trying to make what would have been a very nice human process possible to do at scale and possible to replicate this amazing patient experience without hiring hundreds and hundreds of people.
And
That's really cool.
to underscore that, in the earliest days of our business model and our business, we did write an algorithmic scheduler.
Yeah, we did.
Of course.
I can tell you from personal experience and arguably some amount of trauma that is tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of lines of code to handle the thing that Arthur and I put together in sub a week
Yeah.
with a language model.
And then the cool piece is that we go from that, which is already like way better than either having people do it or writing the algorithm to avoid having people do it. That's already like 2 steps better, right? But the crazy piece is then we can put those tools together, like the find the best available upcoming appointment tool, and we can hook it to other parts of our system where we can say, yeah, well, we want to do something similar, but for scheduling their first appointment, or we want to do something similar, but if a patient has an urgent request, then we'll find them some of these like last available slots in any given day, or notify people who want to be seen sooner if there's a cancellation with their provider and there's an available slot for them, or X amount of other things that we can do. And so these things that we've built as individual workflows can then become like a utility or a flow that can be called for other purposes. And then the even crazier part is that you can train an LLM to choose which flow to run based on the patient scenario. So we're not trying to like eliminate people. We're trying to make sure that the care is amazing. And in a lot of cases, that means you have to have a human connection. But there's way too many places in healthcare currently where a human connection isn't required, and it just ends up being a shit ton of manual work. And we're eliminating as much as we can with that. And because of the current, the exact moment in history that we're living in, it's like so possible and insanely quick.
Yeah, so I always like to think of the analogy of like the chainsaw to the lumberjack, right? Like it just makes you a better lumberjack. We still need lumberjacks, but with a chainsaw, they can get a lot more trees down.
Yeah, and that's like, I would say like a good analogy. And the thing that we're so excited about is you could also have like the chainsaw that tells you which trees need to be cut down at any given time, and like pre-processes like your path to that tree, and then once the tree is cut down, notifies the person who goes and picks up the lumber. It's like that's like the power of this. It's like so exciting to see because we're doubling like every 2 months, and so that would be impossible either without insane amounts of hiring or building at lightning speed.
Super interesting.
Can you take us through? Oh, go ahead, Jared.
I was going to say, what applications would you think you could implement to like a trade service company? A lot of listeners are probably more on the trade service, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, whereas, maybe a service need is requested and someone would call up a company, a service technician would eventually get scheduled, would go out. The company probably doesn't have good systems for getting reviews. There's probably not, a lot of these companies that we're dealing with are probably, manually getting cash or, sending checks or doing old school invoicing. How many automation things or what things immediately jump to mind to be able to smooth up that process?
You should mention the text message urgency flag, because it's like replaces tickets.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit, and then I'll try to give a brief sort of framework to see what you guys are thinking about, because I'm a little bit less familiar with the space, admittedly. So one of the cooler things that we built pretty early on is, prior to the scheduling thing, is like one of the pieces that helped work our way towards it. We realized that there's a lot of patient text message volume that comes in and out of our, effectively in part, telepsychiatry practice, but like in the patient population of our company and then our front office staff, or in the messages between the patient and the clinician. These messages can include things like, hey, do you guys have any availability? I'd love to like switch my appointment. Hey, I'm a new patient. How do I help with this intake form? hey, I'm out of medication, the pharmacy doesn't have my prescription, and I don't know what to do. So there's very different levels of severity across those examples. And ideally, given infinite time, infinite people, you would have immediate response time to all of them. It's not going to happen. Instead, you have to have sort of a priority of like, hey, what really is urgent? And so thankfully, we have like an absolutely stellar team, and we're able to almost learn from them and learn from the clinicians what really is an indicator of something that needs very timely response. But even though they are on top of it, there's such a large volume, especially now, of messages that it becomes increasingly difficult to wade through and find those things. So what we were able to do with a language model is we were able to go through, first of all, we had to be very, very careful, by the way, of like strapping everything down from a HIPAA perspective and anonymizing the data and like flagging IDs. Thankfully, it doesn't sound like your listener base will have to deal with nearly the same number of hoops. But we're now able to flag based on a set of criteria that we worked on with our front office team and our clinicians of like, hey, this is the stuff that needs to be responded to really fast. These are the people on the team you need to get it in front of really fast. Here's the other stuff. It's nice to know, but yeah, just put it in order. We'll handle it later. That is not at all something I think you could have even written an algorithm for, let alone would take a while. Like, I don't think it would have been possible. And now we can do that sub a week. That was like probably a day or two.
Yeah.
And I guess if you want to add anything there, I know the original question was about like the trade example, so I was working my way over, but.
Well, no, I mean, that I think it applies directly to a lot of things you have to do in trades. It's like people really appreciate having a super responsive human-like experience. Like I like texting people that come and work on my house or people that are like, that I need help from. Like, I don't want to have to go through some like website form to like go get in touch with somebody and like create a ticket. But that text is like, by definition, like very free form content. So this allows you to take, to like create a schema for like what matters and then have it be flexibly applied and like you can edit it over time and then it'll flag for the team. So like for a service industry, like let's say like, HVAC or something. If your HVAC goes out in the middle of summer in Florida, like you're not happy. That's going to be urgent, right? So you're probably going to call a few times, you're going to text, etc. You can create some sort of ticket handling system, or you could just pass every text conversation through this LLM and be like, okay, cool. Like we're going to flag all the ones that require immediate maintenance, or we're going to like create tickets for the team, or literally send the route to the person who's going to go service that. And then these other things like, oh, this person's just asking about random question, suggest response, flag the other member of the team, make it a little bit lower priority. We do invoicing and billing, like billing the insurance companies, also with not as much LLMs, but certainly automations. Same thing could be done, especially with invoicing for work done, especially if you have like variety of types of content in the things that the service techs are like putting in their notes. Like you can to Danny's point about transformers, like you can take just about any input and make it a very structured output, which is super important for the more deterministic parts. Anyway, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, scheduling is applicable for like almost any service, right? So like things like that are going to transcend over.
Yeah, actually, if you're open to it, I was curious to hear like if you guys know top of mind what's
like the biggest
more
problem.
common problems like that part of the industry sort of runs into. Because I imagine Arthur and I can rattle off any number of different things, but it's going to be a lot easier to focus if you guys have a better sense than we do of like, what matters that you can share.
Yeah, I'd say the first one for a lot of them is probably hiring, which is just more of a recruiting function, which I kind of think of as like a marketing and sales on the back end versus, customer acquisition is marketing sales on the front end.
Yeah.
So for a lot of them, the work is there. They're just having, a hard time getting people. And I've found it's more a problem of them not being able to market themselves and sell that position to someone and say, hey, this is a better job than what you're doing. So a lot of times these are really good jobs, right? There's plenty of people who are doing something now where they could be in a lot better position if they switched over. That's just a matter of getting the message out.
Wow.
I'd say that's probably number one. Then number two is kind of like that scheduling logistics piece of when do they come over and route density, like for landscaping, like making sure that like the customers are as close as possible and that you're not wasting a lot of time with driving. And I'd say those are some of the more, pretty common problems they have.
Gotcha. I mean, so Thanks for sharing that, because there's probably two things that immediately came to mind. So the first one, let's talk about the hiring question. We experience a rather high volume of PMH&P applications, psychiatric mental health nurse practitioners. That's the primary provider type that we work with, and they're fans of our model, our vision, approach, the way we do things. So a lot of people are coming in the top of our recruiting funnel on many different occasions. It's great. It means that we can make sure to be really stringent with our evaluations, pick only the absolute best and those that really align with us. Also means that there's a lot of job applications to go through and a lot of difficulty kind of making good decisions between who the right people are to hire. So what we did is we went to a whole bunch of like incredible psychiatric advisors that we feel really blessed to have, worked with them on like, what is it that you would do to really evaluate whether or not these people are absolutely stellar, that they're rock stars. We kind of codified that into like an interview script / kind of take home, if you will, with a bunch of like trial clinical scenarios, different things that like test, hey, what would you do if this were the case? Then we had a lot of the clinicians as a first step simply like write out their responses to that. And how do we then apply language models and automation to handle that in service of, oh shoot, we have a lot of application volume? Turns out that language models actually do have a rather significant amount of mental health background context. And if you give them a skeleton to adhere to, something that you say developed with, in our case, psychiatric advisors and experts, or maybe in their case, the guidelines of what they just know they tend to look for, or the best companies that they collaborate with also tend to look for, what their customers have said were their favorite things about the people they've had to come as like fulfill a like particular job or something like that. It can just find those people and give you the top of the stack. Like, okay, great, here you go. Here's the 10 you should actually spend your time talking to. That's under the assumption that the job application volume is too high. Obviously, there's the other one of like you can, if you're talking about marketing yourself, very low-hanging fruit to kind of go use a lot of the off-the-shelf LLM tools and even like digital arts and AI-generated art tools to go build out like a persona for yourself. I've got a AI-generated profile photo that I use everywhere. I've used it to write like LinkedIn bio or Twitter bio. If you're somebody who like struggles to market yourself, even from just a hiring perspective / in general, then it's like the ideal time in the world to now handle that problem and not worry about it.
We created a GPT specifically for that, for the landscaping company we have. And anytime we need something, we run it through that specific GPT, so we don't have to provide context every single prompt.
That's awesome, Dave.
That is huge.
Super cool.
Did I hit both of those too, by the way? I forget if it was hiring and marketing or something else.
Yeah, and then just like the scheduling is similar. Density is more specific to landscaping, but
right.
Just routing, efficient routing.
So I can give a very brief one on that. Perfect example of not so much unstructured data, but difficult to structure and handle. Like, I've also, from like actually back in college, my major, done the traveling salesman problem of like finding the most optimal route between. It sucks.
Yeah, that's why it's unsolvable. Just like the interview summary or like the apartment search, all of those are really tough.
And it's not so much unsolvable as like close to effectively unsolvable because of the amount of time and effort it takes, which thankfully we have language models which don't complain about either of those things whatsoever. So I can imagine that like if you were to take something like Zapier, grab like a Google Maps connector, put in like the list of addresses and then say, hey, LLM, just like figure this out, actually work. Haven't tried it myself, but that's the kind of thing where if you'd have to be open to like a determination level to go dig through Zapier and like the Google Maps data and stuff to get things hooked up. But if you got to that point, you dump in a list of addresses, get out the ideal route.
Yeah, let's actually build on that, because that's one thing I did want to touch on before we got to finish up is the difficulty of actually putting some of these into practice. So like Zapier is one thing, like the scheduling algorithm you talked about, 100,000 lines of code is another. Like, how hard are some of these things to build? And can you go into that maybe a little bit? Are these accessible to the average person?
Yes, asterisk.
More so than ever before. I mean, It's like you don't have to use the 10 to 100,000 lines of code. And you want to pick something that's like suited to your level of need and sophistication. Like you don't want to have to set up like a super insane, even what we did with N8N to make it HIPAA compliant, like took quite a bit of time. You probably don't need that if you're just like trying to find the ideal route. Like what Danny was saying is Zapier, you get an account in like 2 seconds, and then you just make sure that's connected to your, you'd have to get your Google account and then your OpenAI or like whichever other LLM you want. And then you'd have to like play around with the flow, like test it a bunch, but you could probably build it in a couple of hours. And they try to make it as easy as possible to just intuit, like, okay, first this step, then this other step, then this third step, and then I want to print it into a Maps route, or I want to like, because you can literally like create multi-step routes in Google Maps now. I don't think you can do it in Apple, but maybe you can. I don't know. Or you could be like print it into a document that gives you street directions or whatever else you want it to do.
Oh, the only 2 cents I was going to tag on is to like almost step back or scope up to a little bit of a higher level. If in the past one of the most valuable skills in the world was knowing how to Google something, I think today it's knowing how to talk to an LLM, or most people's case, it's often like Bing AI / OpenAI. There's a couple other options, but those tend to be less visible. If you can commit yourself to having a conversation on these topics / like know enough about how to coax out the right answers from an LLM, they know about Zapier and they know how to walk you through it. They know about the Google Maps APIs. They know about a lot of these public language model tools because now their knowledge extends through close to the end of 2023. They know what's available off the shelf that you don't have to stick anything together for. So in a funny way, I think the difficulty of that question is actually pretty high because it's going to really depend on each person and how much they want to commit to having a conversation on, because I think that's what it really comes down to. One great example that comes to mind as a final tag on here is Arthur, and this says a lot about Arthur, but also about this point, has had by far the fastest programming ramp up, like learning to be a software engineer arc I've ever witnessed.
Thanks,
and it's like, I mean, I have to be like careful every time I say this because it's genuinely a true thought, but also I don't want to like inflate his head too much because then the proportions would be like there's never been a better time to throw the question of, is this too difficult for the average person out the window? Because if you're willing to sit there and let GPT tell you how to do it, as many times Arthur's done it himself, I don't always program at all anymore. I'll tell GPT what I want, let it spit out some code that even the experience I do have with programming, I know is wrong. And I'll just copy paste it blindly, run it, get the error, paste it back to GPT, and then I'll say, oh, so sorry, I missed X. Copy that, paste it, run it, and eventually after enough times around, it works. So if somebody's determined enough to go sit down and do that, it'll be able to walk you through Zapier, through N8N, through any tool off the shelf, absolutely no problem.
Yeah, so it sounds like the answer to that is like, like how do you start thinking of every problem is like, how can we solve it with AI? Like that's like the first mindset is like, all right, how can we use this to fix that rather than like, oh, let me just go come up with some other system. It's like to the degree of which you can go to that first as the solution.
Yeah, and to nuance that a little bit, well, one funny aside, the best part about all this is you can ask AI what it thinks the best things to solve first with AI are. And we do that, like, not joking. But that said, we do reach for AI as a foundational like solution to most things first. But we also do always check ourselves on AI is not deterministic. It's ensemble random. So there's a lot of things, especially in healthcare, that have to be deterministic. They have to happen exactly the way that they clinically need to. So we are very intentional about how we use things there, but we also are intentional with the fact that the way problems can be solved is fundamentally different from what it ever has been. So we're going to take full advantage.
Yeah, like you said, it's never been easier than today. It's super exciting times.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, I wish we had a little more time to go into like all the specifics you guys did, but this has been really cool.
Yeah, you guys ever want to have a follow-up? Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, like, happy to deep dive, like, maybe even with one of your listeners on, like, what things we could do, because both Arthur and I just love this stuff, man. There's just so much in the world that couldn't have been solved that's now easy.
For sure.
Yeah, we should do like a deep dive or something one time. Maybe even like a live example.
That'd be cool. Yeah.
Let's do it. And then to close this out, where do you guys see next, 3, 5, 10 years kind of with Legion Health and your personal journeys? Where do you think, you're going to go?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for me to like account for all the things that could happen even in the 3-year time frame. But I know that this year we're trying to, really just keep growing and keep improving the patient experience, and ideally raise a Series A in the next, I don't know, 9 to 18 months. It's kind of a broad range, but depending on kind of what the market is and what we think is like the best time window. But would love to do that and just allow us to keep expanding the populations that we take care of. Probably the states that we're active in, right? We're only active in Texas right now. And the technology, the engineering team, the people that we're able to rope in and build with. And then long term, I mean, mental health is a big space. We would love to keep, accomplishing more in it. And then eventually, ideally have a great outcome, have a great exit, and be able to build more companies. It's pretty addicting.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate coming on. Let's definitely follow up in the not too distant future and kind of dive a bit deeper into it.
Sounds great.
Happy to. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.